Um, Hello and welcome, everybody. I just want to take a minute to say thank you for you taking time out of your evening to spend a few minutes with us. For those people who don't know who I am, my name is Lori Esty, and I am the founder of SOBBS, which stands for Stories of Babies Born Still. And you are going to be participating in our very first ever Google Hangout. And for those of you who've never done a Google Hangout or aren't really experienced very well, we're right along there with you because we're kind of learning as we go too. So please forgive us if we have any glitches or mess ups or anything. But one thing I can share with you is if you do click on your video feed and let it expand to the whole size of your computer screen, you'll see down in the right-hand corner there's a bar that says Ask a Question. So if you would like to ask a question or comment or interact with anybody, or with our speakers, our guest participants tonight, just go ahead and click that bar and send your question over, and we'll see it come up on a running feed over here. So with that, I just wanted to take a minute to introduce our guest participants that we are so honored to have join us this evening. The first person that we have with us today is Caitlin Doughty. She is the owner and founder of Undertaking LA. She is a licensed mortician with many years of funeral industry experience. She is also an accomplished author and travels the world speaking on the history of death, culture, and funeral etiquette. So if we could all just welcome Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Okay, and next we have Amber Carvaly.
Yep.
Amber is... I'm sorry if I missed it. How do you say it?
No, you said it. You said it right. Everyone always mispronounces it, and you totally got it.
Well, I'm glad because I practiced. I really didn't want to mess him up. So Amber is a mortician and service director at Undertaking LA. In reading a little bit of her bio, she has a big heart for the homeless, and she worked as an apprentice in a large funeral home in LA. But she felt that it kind of lacked the personal interaction that she was desiring with families. So she connected with Caitlin, and together they created Undertaking LA, which if you look it up online, you can find out a little bit more about their organization. So let's say hello to Amber.
Hello.
Hi, Amber. Okay, and last we have Sarah Troop. Sarah, how'd I do on that one?
That was probably the easiest one. Good.
Okay, good. Okay, so Sarah is the executive director of the Order of the Good Death, which is dedicated to helping society accept death as a natural experience, but realize death anxiety and fear of modern culture is not. Sarah is also an author as well as an advocate for improved care and support for families who have suffered the death of an infant or child. And we're so grateful to have Sarah here and lend her experience and her wisdom to our Hangout. So if we could just welcome Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll go ahead and see. So like our first question is really, I think it's a good one, and it's kind of going to get us right into the meat, into what we wanted to really kind of get into. So if one of you wanted to comment or maybe read that question and follow up on it, I mean, I'm kind of going to just turn the floor over to you because you all are the experts.
Sure. So I think I volunteered to take the first question, which is a little more of a difficult question, but I think it's kind of an icebreaker sometimes to immediately take a question that's really hard and difficult to address because everything after that seems a little bit easier. So I have a question from The Amazing World of a Girl. Hello, so it kept me up all night. I'm not sure if it's a funeral director question or a physician question, but for some reason I'm very curious about when the decomposition process begins and any acceleration due to being in utero versus delivered. Oh, it's Jennifer, I think. So first of all, when we talk about decomposition, we're talking about a really natural process. And in modern culture, we've kind of been taught to think that the conversation around decomposition is something horrifying or zombies or decay, and it makes us really uncomfortable. But decomposition itself is just something that happens when the blood is no longer moving, oxygen is no longer pumping. So it's completely natural. And I'm certainly not a forensic expert on infant death. But what I do know is that it very much varies depending, first of all, on why the child was born still. For example, if they remain in the mother in the amniotic sac in the liquid, but they are dead, I know that that can cause discoloration of the skin, turning red or purple. Sometimes that can cause decomposition to start a little bit quicker than it would because water or some kind of liquid without oxygen in the body really does accelerate decomposition. But something that I would say is that if you have a child that is born and survives, say, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, they actually have much more time to get bacteria in their body. And bacteria are the main agents of decomposition. So in an adult body, for instance, when you start to decompose and you start to bloat, that's the bacteria really no blood is flowing, so they're sort of chomping away at you from the inside. Whereas a baby in utero doesn't have that same kind of bacterial composition of their body. So they're actually less likely to decompose for a period of time. So of course it completely depends on the baby, how the death occurred, when they were born. So I'd have to know the specific question, but I guess all I really want to say is that it's really okay to have these kind of very specific bodily questions about the death. Don't be sitting there afraid to Google why this happened or not wanting to ask a funeral director why this happened, because they might just know. And sometimes I think knowing more about something, even if it's graphic, can actually really help you feel better.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we're kind of presenting this hangout, to kind of give moms or families a chance to talk about these things that just kind of weigh so heavy on your mind, and they can kind of interrupt your healing process if you don't address them. So we're grateful that you're willing to talk about this very delicate topic. Amber, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think that Caitlin pretty much, like, you did a really eloquent job, probably better than I would have been able to, but I pretty much agree with everything. And I definitely, it's hard because I do agree with I tend to give more information because I always think that more information is better, but I also know it's a very sensitive thing, but I think that was a perfect answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when you were talking a little bit about the decomposition process and that, so talk to me a little bit about maybe why the color of the lips turn real dark and maybe why the baby's skin peels a little bit, if you can kind of touch on that.
Well, that, I mean, can be, I would say, like, if the lips are peeling, that's from dehydration. I know we were talking about decomposition being accelerated by water, but it's also, like, the loss of water and things breaking down. So that happens in just human adults. And then it's referred to as skin slip. That's it. Caitlin, is that an okay way? Is there a better?
Yeah, that's the. I mean, I think that there's what's the technical name for it? Skin slip is what it is referred to in the industry, and it's exactly what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
and that's
it really all it is because the top layer of the skin sloughing off. That's all it is.
Okay.
And again, it's something that we think is horrifying, but really is just a biological response.
Right.
But because it is, blood is coming up and it's keeping the skin moisturized, and sometimes there's too much water in the skin. Again, that skin slippage is something that can definitely happen if the baby was in the womb for several days after death, because they're in this pocket of fluid. And so they have, and it's actually something that happens very often in adults when they have edema, when there's an overflow of water in their body. So I guess it would be the same principle for a baby in utero.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much. That really kind of clears it up a little bit. I do know one of the other questions that came through, and it's not here, so I'm not sure, maybe the user didn't know how to post it. And I'm not sure if this is a question that either of you could comment on or would feel comfortable. But the question was how long after the baby passes, does it become dangerous for the mom to continue carrying the baby? And I don't know if that's more of a physician question or if that's something that you can comment on as being, an expert in your field.
Yeah, I don't, so in utero, like after the baby has passed, how long before?
Right.
actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
No, I really don't. And that's I thought when you were initially asking the question, I thought you meant how long they can carry it in their arms.
Yeah,
The baby had passed away, and I was like, as long as they want, as long as they want, as long as they're comfortable. Oh, you mean carry gestationally? Okay. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
And so again, too, that the breakdown of the baby's skin and things like that, how quickly that happens all depends on the baby's maybe cause of death or gestational age, things like that.
I would think gestational age. And I'm so like tempted to just like peek off the screen and see if I can like do a Google search for that kind of, because I feel like every question I've ever had, I've always been able to find somewhere within the depths of the internet. But I would say just, that definitely I'm sure that gestational age has to play like a huge role in it.
And I will say, and this is kind of difficult for people to hear, but when my first job in the funeral industry was as a crematory operator, which means I performed the cremation. And we had contracts with 2 local hospitals that offered cremations to families after the baby had died, either in utero or shortly after death. And so I have cremated taken care of and cremated a very vast age range of babies. And certainly Amber's correct that sometimes when you have an older baby, it really just is, it's a baby. It looks absolutely like it could open its eyes at any second and, be back in the living world. And then you have babies who are, under 20 weeks, for instance, which we wouldn't tell the mother not to interact with, but, are very different biologically and look very different, and their skin is not formed in the same way.
Right.
I know that for me, I think I was kind of passed around to about 6 different physicians, and I asked that question because they all said, if you were my spouse, I would really want you to deliver now instead of carrying, through and delivering naturally. And one of the things, I asked a lot of questions, and even with the physicians at the hospital, with the nurses, every time I would try and interact with a professional, one of the things that made it incredibly difficult was that no one wanted to answer my questions. They would refer me to another doctor. They would just tell me, I don't know, I'll have the head nurse call you back, and I would never hear from anyone. So that veil of secrecy and discomfort really even extended to the professionals who should be giving you answers. So I think I'm getting a lot out of it, even though we've just started for a few minutes. This is the most open that any professional has ever been in my presence with something I've gone through, where I've really tried to get answers from them, and I've gotten nothing.
That's terrible. And we find that a lot, especially since Amber and our business is letting you keep the body and interact with it after death. We find the exact same thing where you have hospice workers and hospital workers and police officers, all of whom are well-intentioned, but just maybe don't know the answers or don't want to give you an answer or feel like it's a little uncomfortable and will kind of maybe think the dead body might be dangerous in some way, even though they've never had proof of that, but somebody else told them that, and it's just all of this misinformation, which then turns into silence and leaves people, whether mothers or people who their own mother is dying, feel very alienated from the process. And like they can't ask questions, and like they're going to be shoved off to another person if they dare to ask questions.
Right.
It's a real problem. It's a culture of silence around death.
Or making you feel like you're kind of maybe morbid for asking when it's really just your own need to fill the void of something you don't understand. So that's what stopped me from asking questions. And it's interesting, the questions that I see come through on our support group now, and it's things that it's like, oh yeah, I had that question too, and it just never got answered because you're afraid to ask, and or when you do ask, you make the person so uncomfortable that you're speaking to that it's like people just shut down around you. So So yeah, I'm glad that we're having this conversation. You know, one of the questions that I do remember that came up on our wall recently, and this is kind of like maybe a biological question too, I guess. So when you cremate a baby's body, say a full-term baby, how much ashes are there usually?
Sure. It depends. When you said full term would be about half a cup,
okay.
I would say. So an adult person would be between 6 to 8 pounds.
Okay.
And probably about you could fit the ashes in, say, like a Folgers coffee can size.
For an adult.
For an adult, yes. Okay. And a lot of people do use Folgers coffee cans if they don't want to do a traditional urn. And for a baby, it can range anywhere from about a half to a quarter cup to really, I want to say 2 tablespoons if it was, only about halfway to term or even younger than that.
Okay, and thank you for answering that. And the reason why I feel like that's so important is because the mom who had gotten her ashes back, in this case, she felt like the ashes were a very small amount, and she worried about it and fretted over it for a long time. So you could see where that would kind of impede her process. So for ask that question, of somebody who would give her an honest answer without, looking at her like, ooh, why, because you get such strange reactions. I think one time I had asked my doctor, did he think that when my son passed due to a true knot in the cord at 40 weeks, and I had asked him, I said, do you think that he suffered at all? He said, no. He said, I think that it's more just like going to sleep. And I said, okay, which really kind of eased my heart and my mind. And then his next sentence was, would you like to see somebody in mental health? And I thought, oh my gosh, I will never ask another question about this again. So this is really good.
And then we took his license away.
Yeah.
No, not what happened. Yes, so definitely. So people need to remember about cremation is that all the organic material, including muscles and skin and organs, that's burned away during the cremation process. And what's left are the bone fragments. So when you think about how small a child is, especially if it wasn't fully to term, it's just those inorganic, very fragile bones that remain after the cremation takes place, and that's what we break down and give the ashes back to the parents. So your baby may have felt heftier than that, but a lot of it burns away. Same way that an adult man can weigh 200 pounds and only be 8 pounds at the end of the cremation process. So similar principle. It probably did feel like a very small amount of ashes, but I would be surprised if it was not the correct amount of ashes.
Right. Okay. And another question. So for somebody who's never kind of had any experience with cremains or anything like that, when you open an urn, so what would the ashes look like? What would you expect to see? What would be normal? Just to kind of prepare, moms who've never had, like in my case, I had never even been to a funeral when my baby died. So this whole thing was just such a learning curve for me. So I'm just kind of wondering what the ashes would look like.
I mean, I don't know if just saying a very fine powder is a gross oversimplification, but Caitlin, would you say like something else? I mean, would a baby have, I'm wondering if a baby would have bone fragments, because I know an adult, it would be the bag and it would have all of the ashes, and then there would be small bone fragments, but would a baby,
So this might be a sort of higher level sort of thing. So get with your open death conversation hat on, everyone. So when adults are cremated, their bones are again really fragile inorganic bones, and they go into a machine that grinds them into the fine powder, as Amber said.
Okay.
With babies, there's not enough bones there to put them in the grinder, so I would actually do it by hand, because we're not allowed in California to return full bones to a family, baby or adult. So what I would do is I would take the small little fragile bones and I would individually crush them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you would end up with a little tiny, bone fragments. But for the most part, I tried to get it down to a uniform powder because that was what is required of us. And you also You know, I think it depends on, in some cultures, it's very considered lovely to have the actual bones at the end of the process, and that's very much what they want. In America, most people might find that too confronting to have any visible bones, or I can see that that's a little femur, or I can see that they don't want that. So, you know, I tried to be cognizant of that as I did the work. So there shouldn't be, but they look, I mean, they look like adult ashes because it's the same bone fragments, just a much smaller amount.
Okay.
Well, I feel like doesn't, in what are like the laws that we're supposed to adhere to, doesn't it say it has to be unrecognizable? Like, I feel like that's a specific word, like it has to be unrecognizable. Like,
unrecognizable is the word that they use. So it's like, you know, let's make sure death is unrecognizable.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a shame because that's what keeps us in this circle of fear, you know, where we can't really kind of empower ourselves with knowledge or anything like that. It's interesting that you say that about grinding the ashes, because when my son was cremated, we went to the funeral home and picked up his ashes, and I remember sitting. It was like a little brown temporary plastic urn. I remember it sitting on my lap, and when I went to get out of the car, it kind of shifted, and I heard something like move around inside, and let me tell you, I had nightmares about that for weeks. Because I was convinced that, exactly as you said, that there would be a little bone in there, and then I was like, oh, Lord, maybe it's a tooth. Do babies have teeth in their gums? You know, all these kind of things went through my head and just really kind of just drove me crazy to the point. And that's why I had asked you about the actual, what the visual is of ashes, because when it came time to spread our baby's ashes, I was so fearful to look because I was afraid there was going to be a bone or a tooth or something, whatever it was that was making that noise inside that little plastic box. And when it came down to it, my husband opened the ashes, opened the box, and, you know, spread the ashes before I could will myself to look at it. And what it was is it was a little plastic bread tie that was twisted over the baggie that was making that sound. But, man, I had concocted all these horrible things in my head that just really kind of really bothered me for a long time. So I'm glad to have an understanding of how that whole thing works.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a really common fear, I think. I know that I've gotten a lot of emails at the order about people saying my pet died or my father passed away and they were cremated, and I'm terrified to look. Can you tell me, is it going to traumatize me? What does it look like? And walking them through that process and letting them know what to expect so that they can judge for themselves.
Yeah. No, I always say that what we create in our minds and our ability to imagine the horrors of death is always going to be worse than the actual horrors of death.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know if we've had any other questions come through. And for you people, anybody who might just be joining us, if you're not familiar with a Google Hangout, if you click on the screen and make it expand to the full size of your computer monitor, you'll see over on the right-hand side there's a section that you could ask a question if you'd like to ask a question. But I don't know if you all wanted to maybe move on and talk about a little bit about the Cuddle Cot and how that might help the direction that we hope the funeral industry goes in, you know, in the near future. I'd like to see more home funerals and things like that, and people be empowered to do those kinds of things, so death isn't such a hidden thing, and we're not so, you know, traumatized and blindsided and just devastated by the whole thing. We can be more participant in it than just like a bystander. So would you all be a little bit comfortable talking about a little bit about the Cuddle Cot and how that can help preserve a baby?
Sure.
Sorry.
Amber's our lead on this. So
I was looking. Well, I mean, I know I'm really excited about it because I definitely want it to be something where, because I feel like from what I've heard is that I'm hearing a lot of feedback about either women not being allowed to take the babies because, again, of the fear that it's a health hazard. You know, this is like slightly off topic. I was helping answer a question about taking care of bodies at home in Australia, and I was looking up their rules, and they have an 8-hour limit apparently, and all over their laws it was written because it's a biological health hazard, and it was just written over and over again, and I was really surprised and taken aback by like how prominent it is worldwide that just the dead body is something that can't be taken home or that a person can't be responsible for. So I like the idea of this Cuddle Cot being something that's almost like a solution to it, like this like aha thing, like we've found a loophole and now you can't say that we can't take the baby, and just sort of using it to be an advocate or a voice for people when they might not be able to ask, or they might not know that it's something they can do.
Right, right. So when you say 8 hours over there, where, what does that mean? Like 8 hours that they can spend time with the baby before it has to be returned to the morgue, or the deceased person? What can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So what if I'm reading everything right? It's they have 8 hours before a body has to be completely kept at the mortuary under refrigeration, or embalmed. It was interesting that they wrote into the laws, and Caitlin, if you know, because Caitlin knows way more about worldwide stuff. I was just reading about this last night. But it looked like it was written that after that a body had to be embalmed, and a body had to be embalmed for viewing. And I have embalmed, not a lot, but I actually have embalmed babies before, and it's not, I mean, I'm fine with it, but it was a very odd thing to me to be embalming a very delicate and perfect looking child already, and it was sort of upsetting that it was this thing that we had to do, that the parents couldn't come in and see their baby until it had been embalmed and given back to them. It seemed very odd. But it wasn't uncommon at all for me to embalm or take small, I guess like a fetus, and put it in a preserving or topical gel to keep them preserved.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, embalming began around the turn of the 20th century, when it was became a more natural thing in funeral homes around that time, because it was a period of time where a lot of the science still said that death and disease came floating off of corpses, and floating off of cemeteries, and floating off of sewage, and floating off of garbage, that anything that smelled or was unsightly was causing disease. And now we know about germ theory, and we know that diseases are caused by microorganisms. And so everything that the funeral industry has done around its laws, around its regulations, around the pushing of embalming and chemically preserving the body, is all kind of based on this bad science. And I'm not saying you shouldn't embalm. If it's something that you want to do with an adult or a child, you absolutely should do that if that's your choice. But to have this entire industry based on it, when we know now that it's just not true and that the science isn't accurate, I think it's really set us back in how long it takes to debunk those myths, and how long it takes to say it's completely safe to have your mom at home, to bring your baby home, and it's something that we have to work every day, person by person, to tell them that that's not true and to give them the real facts.
Yeah. So basically, it's not a law then that you have to have your baby or your loved one embalmed, and that you can't take them home, because we've run into a few concerns and questions about that very thing. So is it a statewide law or statewide policy, or how could, if a parent wanted to kind of challenge that a little bit, how could they address that?
I think probably the best thing for them to do would be to go to a website like the National Home Funeral Alliance. So I believe it's just nhfa.org or .com, and they will have the laws state by state and you just look in there, and it shouldn't be any different for adults and babies, and maybe some places it is, but it's not in California. And it should just be pretty much every state. You should be allowed to either keep the body at home. Some states require that you have funeral director supervision to transport a body. But in that case, you should be able to call your local funeral home and say, how much would it cost for you to put the baby in your hearse and bring it to my house? And you know, and if they don't give you any sort of discount, or they're not willing to help you out, they're probably not that great a funeral home, honestly.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
So basically, there is no law, no national law that stops a family from taking their baby if they want to.
No, there's not really many national laws in funerals. There are regulations on the national level, but laws in funeral service happen at the state level.
Okay, because we had a family who that's exactly what they wanted to do, is bring their daughter home, and the baby had passed out of state, and there was some issue about transporting across state lines and how they were going to get the baby home, and then once they got the baby home, the baby would have to be embalmed, and it was really devastating for the family to have to, you know, navigate all these logistical nightmare things, and then to get home only to have to turn the baby over to a funeral home to have the baby embalmed. It's just so heartbreaking. So yeah, whatever we can do to kind of help educate families and kind of, you know, empower them to, you know, take hold of their right. They don't realize that they have rights when it comes, you know, comes to their baby. So yeah, the Cuddle Cot could be a great thing for that. You know, they could take their babies home if they wanted to, and not have to embalm. But one of the guidelines I imagine is refrigeration. Is that correct?
Well, so the refrigeration is, yes, it is a guideline, and the way that it works, and I was just looking over the laws, I believe it's, so I as a funeral director have 24 hours, correct, Caitlin? We have 24 hours to place a body under refrigeration once it's taken into our care. However, in the state of California, you're not required to use a funeral director, so I think that the problem is that when people challenge us on this law, that they're not necessarily reading it correctly or using it correctly. They're sort of manipulating it, because the law is only written that once I, as a licensed funeral director, take a body under my care, must it be placed under refrigeration, but it doesn't dictate that you as a family has to adhere to the same rule. Obviously, you want to, the idea is to stave off decomposition for as long as possible, so placing a body under refrigeration is a good practice. Like, I'm not by any means saying that that's not what you should do. So the Cuddle Cot obviously is something that would be beneficial, because we want people to be able to do this, but the problem is that people don't have giant refrigerators at their house. So it's about finding other options for people to do that doesn't force them to have to use a funeral home, or at least right at the very beginning. And I really do think that even just having a few hours could be enough. I get a lot, and I'm sure Caitlin does too, when we talk about stuff like this, it seems like people go, well, gosh, I don't want to keep my mom at home for like 3 or 5 days, and I think people sort of extrapolate a lot from what we're saying, and that I think that the point is even just having just a little bit of time can often be enough to start processing things, so that you're not like Sarah, you know, at the hospital just getting pushed around from nurse to nurse to doctor, and just having a solid option to just be able to go home and decompress and process things, and then just, even if it's 5, 6, 8 hours later, being able to call someone could make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly our goal.
And for someone who dies under hospice or at a hospital, time out of the system, too. Time out of a very medicalized environment or a stressful environment. Time that's just in your own home, in a private, safe space for you. To really say goodbye when you don't feel pressured, when you don't feel a nurse over your shoulder, when you don't feel like a doctor's going to come in and say something that makes you feel like you're morbid.
Right.
As obviously so many of you have experienced. Yeah, and also, what does refrigeration mean? Refrigeration means the Cuddle Cot. It means dry ice. It means having ice packs under the body. There's a lot of different ways that people also interpret refrigeration. And I think the number one thing to remember is that you do have a lot of power as a family. And really, they can come after us as a funeral home, but I have never heard of someone coming after a family for wanting to take care of their own dead. Maybe when you bury them in the backyard when you're not supposed to and have no license for it, that can get dicey. But when you just want to keep them at home for, as Amber said, 5 hours, 8 hours, 2 days, then start to deal with the funeral home and the disposition arrangements, the government is not going to come after your family. They know you're grieving. They know you're in this difficult place. I wouldn't worry about the laws too much.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too, and it's always I feel like a touchy thing to say, where it's just like, no, I wouldn't worry about that. But I mean, I would let, like, me and Caitlin in the funeral home worry more about that than a family in private taking a little bit of time to sit with their, you know, be it their parent, sister, sibling, or their baby.
And Sarah, in your experience, how was the hospital very helpful in encouraging you to spend time with your baby and offering those options to you, that you could take your baby home if you wanted to. It might not be, it's not something for everybody, but if you wanted to, were they encouraging and kind of really giving you information?
They weren't, and unfortunately, some people have a wonderful staff to work with, and they have wonderful supportive nurses and people that were really set up for it. And I think that's much more common in like larger cities too. I'm not in a rural area, but I'm in a small town area. I live in a farming community, and there just weren't the resources. I had to drive 2 hours to go see specialists. So they just weren't set up. The support systems weren't there. And the other thing is that because these myths about the body are so pervasive in our society, what you get is everybody from nurses to emergency technicians to even people at the funeral home telling you that no, this is not legal, this can't be done, when that's not the case. So it's really important that you or a family member, somebody is working on your behalf to know what your real options are and not just always take the answer that you're getting from somebody that should know, like a head nurse or your physician or someone at the funeral home. That I know they don't have bad intentions at all, but sometimes they just don't know. They're just not aware.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, oh, sorry, were you going to talk?
No, I was just going to ask a question to both of you in this community of stillborns and grief. Is there anything like a resource, like a website that's like that'syourbaby.com or youcontrolyourinfantsdeath.com or something like that speaks directly to these issues?
Sarah, I'm going to let you comment on that because you're more recent than I am, and I know for me years ago there wasn't, so I'm not sure what's out there now.
There isn't, and I know Amber and I have done a little bit of preliminary work, and it's overwhelmingly complicated. Every hospital or medical center has their own policy, or they have no policies at all. Every county or state, they all have their own kind of rules and regulations. So there's nothing, there's no kind of ground base. There's no rules or regulations or policies that cover everyone here. And that's been the really frustrating thing. I know that we've talked with somebody who's interested in starting something like this in Texas, but again, it's overwhelming because every single place has a different policy or non-existent policies. So, and it's very hard to approach those things and talk about them again in a society that really turns away from discussing this subject in an open way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
You can go ahead, Amber.
Oh, I was going to say, I know just from like an outside perspective, like I kind of was like, all right, so I'm gonna call some hospitals and I'm gonna ask, I'm just gonna ask these questions, I'm gonna got a time and position to do it, and I just trying to find the right phone number, trying to get transferred to the right person, calling back the next day, not having the person there that I need to talk to being there, and everyone's very nice. I haven't met anybody that was just like, what, dismissive or why are you calling, but it was just sort of, it was just a rabbit hole of like, I don't know, I think you need to talk to so-and-so, she's the charge nurse, she'll be in tomorrow, you should call her, and they're nurses and they're doing things, important things. I have a couple of my girlfriends are nurses and they're wonderful. And so by all means, I'm not saying anything negative about the hospital system or my very wonderful friends who are nurses, but they're busy and they're doing things. And the point is, I haven't gotten any answers back, and I've been pretty determined to get something. And usually I turn up something when I put my mind to it, and it's been very difficult. So I can't imagine what it would be when you're in that moment and you've just been told this really awful news that you've lost your child or your baby's died, or and then to try to track somebody down or get an answer when it's just everyone sort of coming and going, I can't imagine what that would be like, just from my own frustration of trying to just get an answer and not dealing with that situation at hand.
Right, right. And Caitlin, that's a great question too. There should be some kind of resource out there that when families are facing this, that they could click on and go to and say, and it'll tell them, you have rights, and just because it's hospital policy doesn't mean it's the law, all those kinds of things. So that might be a great thing for SOBBS to maybe look into in the future, and not just for families of stillbirth. Any family who's lost a baby, whether it's to SIDS or illness or injury, whatever, they still have rights, and they should be allowed to care for that baby the way that that they want to.
Right. My response to what Sarah was saying and then Amber was, it makes sense that hospitals would have different policies, but it seems like the policy should be sign this piece of paper and take your baby. I don't understand why that's not the universal policy, because it's the law. So, obviously there are some, again, I said some states where there are transport laws where only certain people are allowed to take the baby from point A to point B. And I understand that, but the fact that hospitals don't have something in place, or if there was like a one sheet for each state that says these are absolutely, like, it says hello hospital, like write hospital's name in here, like these are the laws for this state. And so if a hospital is telling you, oh no, that's not what we do, oh, because here's the laws for Nebraska, here's the laws for Tennessee, I have to have a funeral director pick up the baby, but here's my funeral director, here's their number. So they're going to come, and obviously, especially if the parent is not in a place where they even thought that the child was going to die, or they thought they were going to lose their child, they're not going to know, they're not going to come with that piece of paper when they're expecting a different outcome. But at the same time, if it was easy for them to access, if there was a site that was centralized that said how to take care of my baby in this way, I don't know what it would be, but having just one sheets on each state, that seems possible, just something to show the doctor or show the hospital and say, hey, you guys can't tell me I can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be great to be able to empower families in that way to kind of, yeah, that would be great.
Not trying to give any of us more to do.
There's
everyone present.
So in Undertaking LA's experiences, have you advocated or been with a family that has taken their baby home or done like a non-traditional funeral, anything like that?
We haven't yet, no, not with any babies. obviously with adults, and it was something that when I worked at my old funeral home that shall remain nameless, I did notice as something that bothered me a really long time ago. For instance, I did have a baby there, and it was a sort of a passing comment behind me about how the dad wanted to come in and dress the baby, and it was sort of this thing that was bothersome to the staff because it meant like having to clean up our workstation and put things away, and there were people everywhere, and it was really upsetting to me that it was, and I'm not saying that us in the funeral industry are callous or anything. I think that maybe we just get desensitized or we forget, but I really, it's one of the things that I'm very anxious for, is being able to sort of how do you fix that? Not that, I guess fix that wrong. It's something that I want to be able to do in the future, and that's why I'm so kind of anxious and proactive about doing it, because it was something that hurt my heart hearing that it was this thing. It was bothersome to have a dad come up and dress his baby because it would be disruptive to our day, which it's an 8-hour day. We're here to do this. This is our job. I don't really understand why something like that would be bothersome to, I don't know, anybody.
And we should say that our funeral home, Undertaking LA, has only been open for about 7 months. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like we've gone years without doing this. But one thing I will say about something like the Cuddle Cot is it also serves as a tool to let us be known as a funeral home that's amenable to this. Yeah. Because primarily so far we've been known through the three of us and our public advocacies, we've been known as the funeral home that's open to working with you keeping the dead body at home. But that's primarily been the adult dead body. And the home funeral movement has primarily been the adult dead body. But there's a huge room for expansion into, and people have absolutely done home funerals with younger children, But I think there's really a big expansion ability there, and with something like the Cuddle Cot, it makes it a really obvious way, a really obvious tool to say, yes, we're amenable to this, we have this special thing that's going to help us do this, and will just be a nice addition that we can take to hospices and hospitals and let them know exactly what we're going to be able to offer a family.
Right. And I do think that our biggest challenge will be, like I said, like when I was trying to call a hospital in my local area, and I finally got through to one of the nurses, and letting them know what this is, because I was trying to explain to her, like, do you guys have this? Have you heard of this? And she was unaware that this was a thing that could be used. And I was thinking about, babies aren't dying, generally speaking, I wouldn't assume, on hospice at home, so it does make it hard, because trying to get this to be a functioning practice does have that extra step of like really getting through the institution of the hospitals and like trying to get through all the red tape, because I would assume that the majority of babies die within the hospital, and trying to get adults out of the hospital can be difficult at times. So I can understand that babies, which don't, we usually think of babies being born and then living and then leaving that way instead of dying, isn't really something that people think about. And yeah, I don't know if I just went off on a tangent, but I meant to say that it is going to be a little bit more difficult, because it will take a lot of like extra talking to people and really, really promoting this idea, and kind of forcing people to have to talk about it, calling maternity wards and calling hospitals, and instead of talking about how amazing it is that babies are being born, having to force people to talk to you about them dying, and that you want to help people go through this process instead of sort of shoving it away.
Right, and absolutely, and we are running into the same thing. I mean, when we first started out with the Cuddle Cots, talking to hospitals, making cold calls, we were running into the same thing. That the hospitals they're always very gracious and very, they're willing to help, but when you present them with a new kind of not the normal idea, they're just, they kind of shut down. So you try to make a cold call and talk to them, about this concept of the Cuddle Cot, and they're just like, oh, well, no, we're not really interested in anything like that, and they're just totally missing, how it could so help a whole family's grieving experience if they had this, as the foundation, the beginning of their grieving journey to build off of. So I can sympathize with what you've been going through, calling the hospitals and trying to get them to listen. But I think that, I often equate it to, it's like pushing a rock uphill, but I think that you are going to be so fulfilled when you finally get through to them, and then and they really kind of start coming to you for advice and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why we're so passionate with working with Undertaking LA, because you, as a whole, you're embracing the whole concept of it, and it's not just the Cuddle Cot, but the whole, like, helping families if they wanted to take the baby home, to do a home funeral, home viewing. How I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but so I think all that's just very, very important. So we'll just keep, I guess, pushing those rocks uphill, and hopefully, you're going to get somebody out there that'll listen, and it'll really help once we get the first Cuddle Cot placed with you guys.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, so much of it is about getting people to understand what it is now, because it's, as much as Caitlin and I, like, we're just two people, like me, Caitlin, Sarah, three people, and we can't do, we can't do it all, and people do have to, we have to be able to get through that wall of getting people to want to talk about it and admit that this is a thing. I think that all of us at least have, obviously we have Sarah, and I have another friend who just had a miscarriage recently. It is something that affects all of our lives. We have to get people to admit that it's something that happens, and know that this is something that is out there, so that they are in a place to ask those questions when the time happens. So it's about us trying to sort of get to them ahead of time without being, overly morbid, saying, congratulations, you're pregnant, I hope your baby doesn't die, which is, sort of terrible sounding, which I try not to do when my friend was pregnant. I'm like, you're pregnant, that's great, I'm sure that everything will go fine. And they're like, Amber, why would you say that?
Right, and when you have that knowledge base behind you, you feel almost like it's your duty to kind of let people know, this is a possibility, and kind of empower them with knowledge. But then you're like, oh gosh, you're the Grim Reaper, and no, we don't want to hear about all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I feel you.
We're not actually putting a hex on your child by trying to bring that up. It was really interesting when you said you would talk to the hospitals and they'd say, no, 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 we're really not interested. The point, doesn't matter if they're interested, like institution, like it matters whether the families are interested. And I guess this will be sort of the journey, is to figure out how to express to hospitals that this is very much a movement, this is happening all over the country, people do want this, and doesn't mean families have to do it or it has to be the thing you offer, but it should be a thing that you offer.
Yeah. It should be a choice, absolutely. Sarah, in your experience, would you have liked to spend more time with your baby? I'm not sure how it all kind of worked out for you. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I was just going to say that one of the reasons that this option is so important, and I know that everyone who has lost a child will immediately relate to the fact that going home with empty arms is one of the most devastating experiences I can imagine. To have that time to be able to bring your baby home and experience some things with them can alleviate so much of that pain. To be able to create not ideal memories, but some memories, to share a larger portion of that life that we were planning together, and that the Cuddle Cot makes that possible, is such an immense gift. Mm-hmm. And all hospitals should be encouraging that. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think part of it's a fear type thing too. What we're hearing too from some of the nurses is they're a little bit uncomfortable because they feel like they're not trained enough in the use of the Cuddle Cot, and really there's no training equipment-wise that you really need. You just kind of pour the water in and plug it in and turn it on. I think it's more about how do we present this in a dignified, sensitive manner to parents, and that's hard. I mean, when you've got a parent whose baby just died, and you want to go in and you got to talk to him, and you explain to him that we want to you have to keep your baby cool because there's going to be these changes that are going to happen. The skin will change, colors, things like that. It's hard for, I think, nurses to talk to families about that. So if we can empower them on how to present it to the families, I think that's a big step too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, oh yeah, sorry.
I just want to say really quickly, I think we maybe have a lot to learn from some people who have already done a lot of this work, there's a couple of foundations out there that do photography and are partners with the hospitals. And they've kind of, approached that subject and probably have some ways that work about how to start creating that relationship to offer this. Because I know that sometimes when parents are approached and it's a new idea, they're immediately, no, I don't think so. But the nurses, talk them through it and help them. And they're usually really, really, I don't think I've ever heard of a family that hasn't been grateful that they made the decision to have the photographs taken, even if they weren't quite sure what their feelings were at first. So, again, I think we have a lot that we could learn from the foundations out there that are doing photography in the hospitals and have created that relationship with the hospitals as well.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So I guess to kind of summarize things up a little bit, from the funeral perspective, or in preserving the body perspective, a Cuddle Cot. What exactly? So cooling the body. What exactly is that kind of going to? That's going to stop the changes in the skin color, that kind of thing. Can you kind of maybe tell us a little bit about that and kind of touch on that?
I mean, definitely, like the first things that we were talking about, it would definitely help temporarily stop things like skin slip. It probably would help a lot with like the dehydration. So lips, facial features starting to slightly change. I mean, I think that it's really important to reiterate that when babies, children decompose, it isn't a very like sudden, it's not a landslide. It doesn't just happen all at once. They are very subtle and small changes. But I don't know if Caitlin has some like extra input on like how the Cuddle cot or like just like the temporary cooling would help the baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, cooling down a human after they have died is the number one thing that stops decomposition. Short of, you know, putting chemicals in the body, it's the number one thing that stops decomposition. I mean, you think about how they find bodies in very cold climates that are pretty much preserved many, you know, tens, 20, 100 years later, thousands of years later in some cases. Really cold temperatures help that. One thing it does is stop if there is any bacterial growth, in which, as I said, it would be less in a baby that died in utero, but if there isn't any bacteria, it slows that process of the bacteria breaking down the body to a really slow halt. And like Amber said, it's going to be slow anyway. It's really, without refrigeration, it's really the third day or so that things start to, you can really sort of start to tell the decomposition is taking hold. But this is, again, it's not, these are small things. These are little bloating things. These are some smells. These are not like the baby turns into a decayed zombie. You know, this is not what is going to happen. It's still going to be your child. It's still going to look like your child. So it just depends on how long you want it to be at home with you. And my understanding is that for some families, especially that have lost a child, they may want the body for longer than an adult. Because it really is that kind of process of mothering and realizing that it's not going to be with this particular child in the way you thought. So we want to be able to offer them for a longer period of time, and I definitely think that the Cuddle cot will help with that.
Yeah, so this has been really great, you guys. We're almost to the end of our time. It's like 7:57, so we've got like 3 minutes. I didn't really see any questions come through, and I'm not sure if maybe we had a technical error or what was happening here. But if we kind of have a lot of interest, maybe we could revisit this topic again and kind of get together and talk a little bit more about it. Like I said, I do appreciate you guys all kind of pitching in and putting your input on and I'm excited and looking forward to what Undertaking LA is going to kind of, you know, what it's going to evolve to and what we can offer and kind of be the industry standard and maybe the premier that, you know, other organized funeral homes will look towards to when helping supporting a family who's lost a baby. So we're looking forward to all that. But so I wanted to say thanks for kind of joining us, and our hour is almost up. I can't believe it's gone by so fast. I mean, I could ask 100 questions, so maybe if we didn't have any question feed, that's okay. But
well, I did see some stuff on the site, and I was curious if have you gotten any like really positive feedback, or do you have any really like amazing stories from the Cuddle cots that you've donated so far? Because I know I've been following your story and seeing that you've been doing a lot of placements, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to really get a lot of feedback from families, you know, and just saying, basically, the majority of it is, you know, I didn't realize that this was an option, and I wouldn't have rocked my baby, or I wouldn't have bathed my baby if the baby wasn't right in the room, if it was kind of like a hassle to have to ask staff, and you know, that kind of thing. So we're getting a lot of feedback like that. And families who have had out-of-state grandparents that have to come in, and usually maybe a couple days later. So that's kind of really helped in make sure that, you know, the baby doesn't have any changes or anything like that. But we're getting a lot, and so that's what's making the change in the institutions, the hospitals, is because families are demanding this. They're here by hearsay. They're hearing other families say, "I had this amazing experience," and at first when they suggested it or brought it to me, I was a little bit hesitant. But, you know, I kind of embraced it and went with it, and it was just really, given the circumstances, it was the best experience it could have been. So we're getting a lot of good feedback on that. So hopefully, you know, we can kind of partner with you guys and, you know, a couple experienced families that you support and kind of have this be a positive thing for those families as well.
Yeah. So I know I saw on a Facebook post, because I feel like there's one in San Diego. I feel like I saw someone pop in on something that I had put on our Undertaking LA page where they said, like, oh, there's one at I don't know if it's like UC San Diego or like a hospital down there, and they were saying really incredibly positive things about, like, oh, it's made such a world of difference. It was for my friend, and she used it, and we loved it. You know, and she was so happy that she got that opportunity.
Yeah,
so
we get a lot of feedback, and I think that one in San Diego, that one was placed with Wake Up Gavin. Is that the one where that radio personality?
I forgot.
yeah, so there's been a lot of publicity, media interest through that story. So that has really been great. So hopefully that'll kind of, you know, inspire some change there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then I see there's one other question over here, and I actually wasn't sure, and I didn't know. I thought that this was a good question because we've been talking so much about stillborn babies, but we know that obviously babies there's lots of various reasons they could die. And it's someone asking about the weight of the child that the cuddle cots go up to. Do you know?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. The cuddle cots, it's the company's name is Flexmort, which stands for Flexible Mortuary, and they actually have cuddle cots that are infant size, then they have child size, and they have adult size. They're also in the process of developing like mass casualty tents that are kind of like cuddle cots but cool tents. So I guess like when the Ebola outbreak was a little bit ago, they were contacted by that country asking could they create something like that so that they didn't have to bring bodies into the hospitals to be examined, but they could still be stored, you know, and kept cool, that kind of thing. So the cuddle cot itself, the weight really, I mean, I think what our guidelines was up to 20 pounds, but then it goes into the child size because it's based on the mat that is inside the unit,
yeah,
chill mat. So
yeah, awesome.
But okay, well, so is there anything else you guys wanted to say in wrapping up? And
Caitlin or Sarah?
Oh, well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and I hope this was helpful for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do know that as soon as we shut down, the link will be posted so we can share this on our walls, and people, I think you can edit it and things like that. So people that weren't able to view or to attend, and like I said, I hope we didn't have any technical glitches where we didn't see questions, and I'm, you know, something that didn't come up, I don't know, but it's a learning curve, and so we appreciate everybody who did peek in on us, and we'll see what we can come up with in the future.
Yeah, I was going to say I would definitely encourage anybody that is either watching this right now or is going to watch it later, you know, we need people to speak out. Things don't change if people don't demand it or ask for it, and there has to be a public interest. And Caitlin and I and Sarah, we can keep telling people that this is something that we think is great, but until we get more people behind us that really want it, that's what that will aid in changing. So I definitely invite people to send questions to undertakingla@gmail.com, and I would be happy to read them, answer them, find out, you know, whatever I can. So just want to put that out there.
Okay, that's great. We appreciate that. That's wonderful. And I will be in touch with you, ladies. We'll get the link sent, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.